Every year, more than 8.9 million tons of beef cross oceans, borders, and climate zones in an invisible ballet of logistics. Ships dock silently at ports, containers hum with cooling systems, and pallets of red meat slide into position with robotic precision. At first glance, it seems simple. Load, chill, deliver. But beneath the surface of every ton lies a silent contradiction. A thermal paradox that logistics engineers and cold chain managers must solve daily. Because beef, even when motionless, is never truly still. It holds heat like a memory, like a slow echo of the animal it once was. And managing that lingering warmth is one of the greatest unsung challenges of modern food transportation. Inside each cut of meat, even after slaughter, metabolic activity fades gradually. It doesn't stop instantly. What remains is known as biothermal inertia, the tendency for internal muscle temperature to resist change, lagging behind what external sensors record. From the outside, a beef pallet may register a perfect 0 degrees Celsius. But in the core, especially in dense muscle clusters, heat can still be rising. It's a delay that no surface probe can fully capture. And when the system trusts only the surface, spoilage doesn't start with failure, it begins with overconfidence. Think of it like precision seeding. In modern agriculture, a planter's seed meters must adapt to every shift in density. If the field changes texture mid-roll and the planter doesn't compensate, seeds misfire and productivity suffers. In meat logistics, the same principle applies. If cold air is distributed without acknowledging the mass and thermal density of what lies inside, the result is uneven cooling, invisible hotspots, and accelerated decay. Cold, in this system, is not a number. It's a choreography. To grasp the scale of the challenge, imagine mining conveyors. Massive belts moving, tons of ore with calculated load sequencing. Engineers don't just fill the belt evenly. They model the density clusters of minerals to avoid tension points that could break the system. In beef logistics, this same logic applies. A container must be loaded with zoning in mind, not just weight. If certain areas retain more heat due to cut shape or fat content, they demand more than cold air. They demand foresight. The greatest misconception is that refrigeration alone ensures safety. But after just 4 hours post-loading, the delta between internal and external muscle temperature can reach critical levels. Even as sensors show compliance, it's not just a cooling issue, it's a misreading of the meat's true condition. Because unlike frozen goods, beef is not a static product. It breathes, decays, resists, and so the provocation arises. If engineers in heavy industry simulate friction and failure points by mapping volume and density clusters, why does much of global beef logistics still rely on average surface temperatures? Why are we treating a living thermodynamic mass as if it were simply a cold object? Precision mechanics, thermal zoning, load distribution, these are not just for mining and seeding. They are the silent instruments in the orchestra of global meat movement. Inside every sealed container of beef, a microclimate forms. It's not visible to the naked eye, nor does it follow the external climate forecast. It's governed by the silent interaction between meat mass, packaging geometry, residual biological heat, and the invisible battle between oxygen depletion and thermal retention. This microclimate is where the journey either succeeds in silence or fails without notice. And once the doors are sealed, it begins. An enclosed biosystem, rich in potential, vulnerable in design. Freshly slaughtered beef carries with it more than just weight. It carries warmth. Even after the animal's life has ended, the cells inside remain in slow motion, releasing metabolic heat long after cooling begins. This heat builds not on the surface, but in the core, especially within large muscle groups or tightly stacked loins. The result is a zone of anaerobic stress where oxygen drops, temperature lingers, and spoilage accelerates from the inside out. What looks like refrigeration success from the outside may, in fact, be a quietly expanding phase. To counter this invisible heat, engineers are turning to an innovation as precise as it is unexpected: phase change gel packs. But these are not generic cold packs. They are calibrated by cut thickness, marbling index, and thermal inertia profiles, factors once considered too nuanced for large-scale. Inserted between loins, these pads act like thermal buffers, absorbing residual heat in exactly the areas most prone to retention. Their placement is not random. It follows data drawn from temperature sensors and spoilage pattern mapping, forming a second skin of control inside each. What's striking is that constancy isn't always the end. In trials, beef stored at a steady 0°C showed up to 11% more spoilage than cargo subjected to intermittent cooling. Why? Because uninterrupted cold failed to penetrate the persistent warm core effect. The solution wasn't more cold. It was smarter cold, targeted and timed to match the decay curve of the meat itself. The very notion that stability equals safety is challenged here, replaced by an understanding that biology doesn't respond to averages. It responds to its own risk. This approach isn't theoretical. In Europe, one logistics group deployed thermal barrier spacers, thin inserts designed to redirect airflow and prevent contact heat transfer between stacked. The result was measurable: an increase of 6.7 days in shelf stability during cross-border shipments. The extension wasn't just a win for transport. It meant fewer losses, lower waste, and a more reliable supply, all without adding a single degree of extra refrigerant. What emerges is a new logic for cold chain planning. Instead of thinking in terms of average crate readings, the strategy shifts toward anatomical cooling profiles designed not for space, but for substance. Each cut of meat, with its unique blend of muscle, fat, and thickness, becomes a thermal entity to be understood, mapped, and it's no longer enough to ship beef at the right temperature. We must ship it with the right internal equilibrium, a balance between biology and engineering that ensures safety not by force, but by understanding. Before we move on, consider this. Every pallet of beef is a system of moving heat, muscle, and timing, calibrated with surgical precision. The same kind of thinking powers everything we do around here. If you're into tools, gear, or solutions that respect that level of precision, take a second to check the pinned comment. There's something there you might appreciate. Every minute in the cold chain matters. Not just because temperature must be kept low, but because reactions inside the meat don't pause. They slow, resist, shift, depending on oxygen levels, fat content, and time since slaughter. And yet, across much of the global meat logistics network, decisions that shape the fate of a shipment are still made by feel, instinct, or habit. A ventilation cycle gets paused during a customs inspection. A refrigeration setting is tweaked in response to outside humidity. Human judgment, though experienced, often relies on immediate surroundings, not on the evolving entropy inside each container. This is where the cold chain fractures, not from equipment failure, but from good intentions colliding with biological complexity. A technician overriding the airflow system may feel the container is too cold or too warm, based on ambient touch or visual cues. But the meat doesn't operate on air temperature alone. Its decay is governed by internal entropy, the breakdown of proteins, the fading signal of ATP reserves, the microscopic processes that continue long after slaughter. Managing this requires more than instinct. It demands a system that sees what we cannot. Enter predictive AI platforms, designed not just to maintain temperature, but to model the meat itself. These systems ingest data from slaughterhouses, packaging, stages, and shipment conditions, and simulate how beef will behave under varying environmental inputs. Using models of post-slaughter ATP degradation, they predict where and when airflow needs to be redirected, humidity adjusted, or thermal zones recalibrated. And unlike a manual override, these decisions occur with real-time responsiveness, fine-tuned to the biology of the cargo, not just to what sensors show on the surface. The results speak with precision. In comparative studies, shipments managed by AI-guided airflow systems experienced 22% fewer container rejections at ports. That means fewer delays, less spoilage, and more reliability for producers and buyers alike. Not by pushing harder, but by sensing smarter. Algorithms, unlike humans, do not get distracted. They do not estimate. They calculate decay based on molecular kinetics and act without hesitation when conditions shift. Their logic is biological, not bureaucratic. In South America, one major beef exporter implemented neural feedback cooling algorithms across 5 primary trade lanes. The platform monitored entropy levels and thermal performance in real time, adjusting container settings without waiting for operator input. Over the course of a year, the company reported a reduction of $1.2 million in freight loss costs. But more than savings, what they gained was consistency, the most fragile commodity in perishable logistics. The insight here is strategic. Beef should not be cooled by generalized refrigeration threshold. It should be managed by dynamic entropy profiles, specific to the muscle structure and biochemical life cycle of the cargo. Temperature is only a prop. What truly matters is how energy decays inside the meat, how it disperses, and how long the system takes to respond. When the cold chain listens to the meat, not just the numbers, waste decreases, quality rises, and the entire system gains a new kind of intelligence, one that doesn't override but anticipates. On a modern farm, no pass of the planter is left to chance. Beneath each wheel, sensors read the resistance of the soil. Compact zones are softened in real time. Seeds are dropped with millimeter precision, at depths calculated not just by crop type, but by what lies beneath the surface. It is a choreography of mechanics and memory, where every meter tells a story, and every adjustment is informed by data. This precision, so natural in today's planting process, is the result of decades of refinement. Yet, when we shift from the field to the cold chain, something curious happens. The meat that was once part of a living, breathing system is treated with less nuance than the soil it fed upon. The containers become uniform, the cooling protocols generalized, and the complexity of biological cargo is compressed into a single number: external temperature. This is where the next revolution must begin, because beef is not just freight, it is a decaying biological structure with thermodynamic properties that vary not only from carcass to carcass, but from muscle to muscle. Each cut holds heat differently. Fat insulates. Muscle releases warmth at uneven rates. Bone slows the cooling curve. When these factors are ignored, microclimates form inside. Pallets, hidden zones where spoilage starts long before it's visible. It is a silent failure that spreads not from lack of technology, but from a lack of modeling. We measure too little. We assume too much, but change is coming. One of the most promising shifts in cold chain agrimechanics is the adoption of anatomical's thermal mapping. The idea that every shipment of meat should be cooled not by ambient standards, but by the specific internal characteristics of the cargo. Platforms like ColdTrack AI are already proving this concept. Before the beef even leaves the processor, it is scanned. CT imaging identifies zones of higher thermal resistance. These maps inform the layout of pallets, the positioning of airflow, vents, and the integration of phase change inserts, tailored to each cut's decay curve. The result is not just colder meat, it's smarter meat, stabilized by systems that respond to its internal complexity. This transformation mirrors what has already happened in the field. Just as soil is no longer seen as a uniform medium, but as a mosaic of textures, nutrients, and pressures, meat must be understood as a matrix of biological variables. The logic is the same. Adapt the machine to the material. Adjust in real time. Respect the hidden forces at play. It is here that a new framework for logistics takes shape. One that views cargo not as passive mass, but as a dynamic organism in its final stage of life. Cooling becomes not a routine process, but a final act of care, precision, and engineering. A system tuned not just to keep things cold, but to preserve the integrity of a resource that took months to raise, seconds to harvest, and days to deliver. And so, a quiet question rises. If we read the soil every 10 centimeters to optimize a seed's emergence, why are we not applying the same care to what leaves the field? Why cool by tonnage when we could cool by tissue? Why settle for uniformity when the challenge demands specificity? The tools are already here. The models are evolving. All that remains is to connect what we've learned in the soil with what we must master in the cold chain. In this, agriculture finds its continuity not only in growth, but in the invisible, intelligent systems that carry its results to the world. And before this journey ends, pause for just a second. Beneath everything we've shown, the precision, the engineering, the silent movement of temperature and time, there's always more waiting beyond the. If this kind of perspective speaks to you, take a look at the pinned comment. You might find something there that continues the story in a different way, subtle, surprising, and worth the click.